and a quiet town in the American Midwest, where the nights were always eerily silent, an unusual event occurred. Jack, a taxi driver, often took passengers from the small town to the nearby city during the night. One evening, as he drove along an empty highway, a woman in white appeared and waved her hand, signaling for the car to stop. Jack pulled over, and as soon as he saw the woman, a strange feeling of fear crept over him. But he wasn't the type to refuse a passenger. The woman climbed into the car and, in a soft voice, said, "Take me to the cemetery on the outskirts of town." As they drove, Jack felt something was off. He tried to strike up a conversation, but her brief replies only added to the unsettling atmosphere. While driving, Jack glanced at the rearview mirror and noticed her reflection had vanished. It was as if she was no longer there. Terrified, Jack stopped the car and turned around. The woman was still sitting there, but her face was horribly twisted. Her eyes had become hollow and dark, and blood dripped from her lips. Gathering his courage, Jack sped up, trying to escape. As they neared the cemetery, the woman told him to stop the car. When Jack did, she was gone. The next day, Jack told the town's elders about the incident, and they revealed that the woman had died in a car accident years ago. Now her spirit wandered the cemetery. After that night, Jack avoided driving at night. But the memory of the encounter stayed with him. Jack couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. He tried to convince himself that it was just a hallucination, but deep down he knew something wasn't right. Weeks passed, and Jack began to avoid night driving altogether. Yet the eerie feeling never left him. The silence of the roads, the image of the woman, and her chilling voice kept haunting him. One evening, while sitting at a diner trying to enjoy a cup of coffee, an old man walked in. He had a weathered face, his skin deeply tanned from years of hard labor, but his eyes were sharp and wise. "I heard about your encounter," the old man said, sitting down across from Jack. Jack looked at him, startled. "You know about that?" The old man nodded slowly. "The spirit of that woman, she's not the only one. There are many lost souls, wandering between this world and the next. Some are trapped, unable to find peace." Jack's heart raced. "Why me? Why did she appear to me?" The old man paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "She appeared to you because she knew you were the one who could help her. Not all spirits are vengeful. Some are simply lost." Jack felt a cold shiver down his spine. "What do I need to do?" The old man leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Go to the cemetery on the night of the full moon. There you must find her grave. She will come to you again, but this time you must offer her the peace she seeks." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He knew he had to face the truth and confront his fears. He had to return to the place where it all began. The next full moon, Jack drove to the cemetery. The road was as lonely and dark as ever, but he felt the weight of his decision in every step. As he approached the cemetery gates, the air grew colder, and the silence felt even more oppressive. Jack walked through the cemetery, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The moonlight cast long shadows over the gravestones, and the wind whispered through the trees. Then he saw it, a solitary grave with a faded name carved into the stone. He knelt down and whispered, "I'm here to help you." Suddenly, the air grew thick, and Jack felt a presence behind him. He turned around and saw her, the woman in white. But this time, her face was calm, and her eyes were no longer dark voids. She stepped forward, her voice soft and mournful. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time, Jack saw a faint smile on her lips. With a flash, the air around her shimmered, and she vanished, leaving behind only the faintest scent of roses. Jack stood up, a feeling of peace washing over him. The woman had finally found rest, and he had helped her move on. From that night onward, Jack never saw her again. But whenever he passed by the cemetery, he felt a sense of calm. The roads no longer seemed as lonely, and the nights no longer felt as dark. But deep down, Jack knew that there were still many spirits waiting, just as lost and just as desperate for someone to listen to their stories. And sometimes, the night wasn't as empty as it seemed. Months passed, and Jack tried to move on with his life. He resumed his normal driving routine. though he always made sure to avoid the cemetery road at night. But deep within him, something had changed. His encounters with the unknown, with the lost spirit, had left an indelible mark on his soul. One chilly autumn evening, as Jack was driving through the sleepy streets of his town, a familiar feeling settled over him. The wind howled through the trees, and the moonlight cast long shadows across the empty road. Something was calling him, something he couldn't ignore. He parked his taxi near a small old bookstore that he hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a corner of the town. The lights inside flickered weakly, but the door was slightly ajar, inviting him in. He stepped inside, the old wooden floor creaking beneath his feet. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair and piercing eyes that seemed to know him. She smiled warmly, as if she had been expecting him. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked. Jack hesitated, but there was something about her presence that felt comforting, even though he had no idea why. "I don't know. Something feels different tonight, like I need to understand more about, well, the things I've seen," Jack replied, his voice trailing off. The woman nodded as if she understood exactly what he was talking about. "You've encountered something beyond this world, haven't you?" she asked softly. Jack was taken aback. "How do you know?" The woman smiled again. "I've been waiting for you. You're not the first to seek answers, and you won't be the last. But you need to know that some things, some spirits, are not meant to rest easily. They linger, and they call out for someone to listen, someone to set things right." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "But I helped the woman in the cemetery. I thought she was at peace." The elderly woman shook her head slowly. "It's never that simple. She may have found some peace, but not all spirits are tied to the place they haunt. Some carry a curse, others seek redemption, and some," she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, "are part of a greater mystery, a cycle that must be broken." Jack was silent for a moment, processing her words. "What do I do now?" The woman placed a worn book on the counter in front of him. It was old, with a leather-bound cover, and the title was barely legible. "This book will guide you, but be warned, the path you're about to walk will not be easy. There are more spirits like the one you met, and not all of them will want your help." Jack hesitated, but then took the book. "Where do I start?" "Return to the cemetery," the woman said with a somber look. "But this time, you must go deeper into the grounds, beyond where you went before. Be prepared, for you will not be alone." That night, Jack found himself back on the familiar road to the cemetery. The full moon bathed the landscape in an eerie glow, and the wind carried the scent of decay and forgotten memories. The air was heavy, as if it knew what was coming. This time, Jack didn't hesitate. He parked his car and walked deeper into the cemetery, his footsteps slow but determined. As he ventured further, he noticed something strange. There were more graves here, hidden behind tall, overgrown grass and vines. Jack stopped at an unmarked grave, its stone cracked and weathered. He opened the book, and the pages seemed to turn by themselves, stopping at a passage written in faded ink. The words were clear. To break the curse, one must face the spirit's past, uncover the truth that lies buried, and set free what was never meant to be chained. As soon as he read the last word, the ground beneath his feet trembled, and a cold wind swept through the cemetery. The woman in white appeared before him once again, but this time her expression was different. Her eyes were not filled with sorrow, but with pain and fear. "It wasn't always like this," she whispered. "My name was Emily, and I was wrongfully accused. My spirit is trapped here, seeking justice. Only you can help me." Jack's heart raced as the truth dawned on him. Emily hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered, a victim of a crime that had gone unnoticed, her name erased from the records. "How can I help you?" Jack asked, his voice shaking. Emily looked at him with a pleading gaze. "You must uncover the truth of my death, reveal the one who took my life, and bring justice to my soul. Only then will I be free." Jack stood frozen as Emily's words sank in. The weight of her plea hung heavy in the cold night air. For the first time, he understood the full depth of the tragedy that had bound her spirit. She wasn't just a lost soul. She was a woman who had been wronged, her death covered up, her story erased from time. "You have to find out who did this to me," Emily repeated softly, her voice trembling. "Only then will I be able to rest." Jack's mind raced. The cemetery, with its overgrown graves and dark secrets, suddenly seemed like a labyrinth of buried truths. How could he uncover what had happened to Emily all those years ago? Without a second thought, he grabbed the book the old woman had given him and flipped through the pages. The words on the fragile parchment seemed to glow faintly, guiding his eyes to a section that described the history of the cemetery. One name stood out: Henry Caldwell. The book said he was a prominent figure in the town many years ago, a wealthy man with a reputation for ruthlessness and greed. According to the pages, Henry had lived near the cemetery, and he had been involved in a number of mysterious disappearances that were never investigated. Henry Caldwell, Jack muttered under his breath. Could he be the one? Emily nodded, her eyes darkening. He was the one. He had a reputation for making people vanish when they got in his way. I was one of them. Jack knew what he had to do next. He needed to find out more about Henry Caldwell. He couldn't let Emily's spirit remain trapped forever. The next morning, Jack visited the town's library, hoping to find anything about Henry Caldwell. The librarian, an elderly man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, raised an eyebrow when Jack asked about Caldwell. "Henry Caldwell, you say? I'd be careful with that name," the librarian warned. "That man was involved in some shady business. Some folks say he had ties to the black market. Others say he was into darker things." Jack leaned in closer. "What happened to him? Was there ever an investigation?" The librarian sighed, pushing his glasses up. "No one ever proved anything. Henry disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Right around the same time, a lot of people started vanishing. The local authorities didn't want to make waves, so they just let it go. People stopped asking questions, and the town moved on." But Jack wasn't satisfied with this. He pressed further. "Where can I find more information about him? I need to know more." The librarian narrowed his eyes, then muttered, "Try the old courthouse. The records are stored there if they haven't been moved or destroyed." With this new lead, Jack set off toward the old courthouse on the outskirts of town. It was a crumbling, abandoned building, its windows boarded up, and its once grand facade now weathered and forgotten. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. Jack made his way to the basement, where the old records were stored. He searched through stacks of boxes, each labeled with names and dates that made his heart race faster. And then, buried beneath a pile of yellowed papers, he found it, a folder with Henry Caldwell's name scrawled across the front. As Jack opened it, his fingers trembled with anticipation. The file contained old newspaper clippings, letters, and photographs, all pointing to one shocking conclusion. Henry Caldwell had been involved in a series of disappearances, including the case of Emily. One particular letter caught Jack's eye. It was a letter from Emily herself, written just days before her death. She had accused Henry Caldwell of threatening her, warning her that she was about to expose his dark dealings. In the letter, she had begged for help, fearing for her life. Jack's heart raced as he pieced the information together. Emily had been trying to go public with what she knew about Henry, but before she could, he silenced her forever. Jack knew now that he had to confront the past head-on, not only to set Emily's spirit free, but to bring the truth to light for everyone who had been affected by Caldwell's actions. As dusk fell, Jack returned to the cemetery with the evidence in hand. Emily's spirit was waiting for him, her presence growing stronger as he approached the graveyard. "Do you have it?" she asked, her voice echoing in the cold night air. Jack nodded. "I found the truth. It was Henry Caldwell. He was the one who killed you and many others. I have proof of what he did." Emily's face softened with a sense of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now my soul can be at peace." But before Jack could react, the ground beneath him began to tremble, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and imposing, with cold, dark eyes. It was Henry Caldwell. Fading into the night. I am free." From that night onward, Jack never saw Emily again. But whenever he passed the cemetery, he felt a sense of calm, knowing that he had helped set a trapped soul free. The town, too, seemed to change. The dark shadows that had lingered for so long finally lifted, and the truth about Henry Caldwell was no longer a whispered secret. Justice had been served, not only for Emily, but for all those who had been lost to his cruelty. Jack continued his life, but he never forgot the lesson he had learned that night. Some spirits are bound by secrets, and some truths are worth risking everything to uncover.